pleasure to have Professor Yafeng from University of Michigan Ann Arbor, and he's a professor in both civil and environmental engineering and also the industry and operations research department. And before joining Michigan of Ann Arbor, actually he was a professor in University of Florida, which is about 2 hours away from us. And Dr. Yin is an internationally recognized translation expert. He has published more than 100 papers in top translation journals, which is a very impressive number. And you probably have seen a flyer. He's the editor-in-chief in Translation Research Part C and department editor of the Service Science, as well as associate editor for Translation Science. And those are all top journals in translation area. And I have known Yafeng for a very long time. When I just got to UC Berkeley, I was a graduate student there, and Yafeng was a postdoc in the past, which is Caltrans-sponsored research center. And I think Yafeng inspired me from many different ways in terms of research, in terms of the how to build up the leadership, and I really appreciate that he led my way, get into some translation professionals, and also I think he encouraged me to get into the academia work. So from this perspective, I'm really thankful for that about this. So without further ado, please join me to welcome Professor Yafeng.
Thank you, Yu, for the very touching and very kind introductions. Also, thank you for your interest in my talk today. Because I have so many materials, I want to jump into the topic right away. Okay? So my plan today is to talk about rice sourcing systems. It's about macroscopic modeling. We can use macroscopic modeling to do many things, but I'm going to focus on two specific issues. One is about regulation, and the other one is about a macroscopic fundamental diagram of rice sourcing systems. Okay? So I think for this audience, I don't have to spend a lot of time introducing what are the rice sourcing services. So rice sourcing services are services provided by companies like Uber and Didi and Lyft. Okay? So the company provides an app that match drivers with passengers. The drivers are, that's the key point. Okay, the drivers are private car owners who drive their own vehicles to provide a service for profit. So essentially, the rice sourcing services are crowdsourced taxi services. Okay. Normally the apps are provided by the platforms. The apps are free to use, but the platform charges a commission. Okay, which is about 20-25% of the fare paid by the rider, to the drivers. Okay. So since Uber started service in 2010, but technically Uber started UberX in 2013. Okay, so rice sourcing services started in 2013 officially. So since then, rice sourcing company enjoyed huge success, but also created many controversies. Okay, such as the unfair competition argued by the traditional taxi industry, congestion imposed by rice sourcing vehicles, etc. Okay, so anticipating that the rice sourcing services and also other type of mobility services will become more and more important in urban transportation. So we started a research program 5 years ago that aimed to study the operations of the services and to understand their impacts, and also try to develop policy to guide their deployments, and also develop policy or strategy to improve the operations. Okay. So we've been focusing on rice sourcing services, but a lot of findings actually are applicable to other type of services because so many things are in common. So I work with my students at the University of Michigan and previously University of Florida. And also Professor Hai Yang from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology is one very important collaborator. And I also work with Professor Jieping Ye. He actually is a professor at the University of Michigan, but he takes a leave of absence and he's the vice president of Didi. So Didi is essentially a counterpart of Uber in China. So they provide similar services. So working with Didi allow us to peer into the operation, and so to make sure that our research is of practical relevance. Okay. And also allow us to have access to some of their data, which allow us to do some empirical work. So our research was sponsored, has been sponsored by National Science Foundation, DD, and also our regional UTC. In the whole research program, we actually look at the major players in the systems, which include the platform, riders, and drivers. And we try to address critical issue associated with each player. And for driver, for example, we conduct empirical study to understand their behaviors. So their labor supply behaviors, where they search for customers, and how long they work, and also their route planning. And for the riders, we also study their behavior. For example, how they make choice between riding alone or sharing ride with somebody else. But most importantly, we actually work with Didi and work with platform to improve their matching strategy, their pricing, information sharing, and also contract design to attract different type of drivers, and also providing rewarding scheme, how to incentivize driver to work longer and work in the location where Didi want the driver to work. Okay, but also more importantly, we take a system approach. We look at the interaction among those three players, and then we construct mathematical or macroscopic modeling to try to derive insights on the system performance and system performance properties, and also try to derive insight on the policy, how we're going to regulate or manage driver sourcing services, how we're going to deploy the services to integrate with traditional the public transportation systems. Okay, so that's the focus of the macroscopic modeling. So today, my plan is to focus on these two things. One about regulation, the other one is fundamental diagram. Okay, a macroscopic fundamental diagram of the ride sourcing systems. Okay, so let me start with regulation. Regulation is very important because if you think about traditional taxi industry, so it is highly regulated in terms of market entry, in terms of price. But those two requirements are not imposed to ride sourcing platform yet. Okay, so and the current requirements actually are on the insurance coverage, driver's background check, and inspection protocols for ride sourcing platforms. There's no intervention about the pricing and also fleet size for ride sourcing services. Okay, so but last year, very interesting, New York became the first major American city that actually require and regulate market entry for ride sourcing services. Okay, they actually try to restrict the number of ride sourcing vehicles. So this is essentially a market entry regulations. Okay, so in this talk, I will suggest that if regulating is really necessary, and we suggest regulating commission instead of regulating market entry. Okay, so we derive this insight from macroscopic modeling. So therefore, my plan will be I will introducing the macroscopic modeling of the market structure and competitions, and then I'm going to walk you through the process how we actually derive the insight for regulations. Okay, so my plan is to introduce this macroscopic modeling. And so in developing this macroscopic modeling framework, and we start simple. We start from simple assumption first. Okay, so we're going to look at a spatially homogeneous market. Okay, the city is homogeneous, and we consider steady state. We're going to construct a very, very aggregate model to model the whole market. Okay, so in constructing this model, I will treat ride sourcing market as a two-sided market with driver on one side and customer on the other side. So what platform does are two things: determine pricing, the price for rider, and deduct by the commission the price for the driver to attract driver and passenger to the platform, and then they use matching technology to match them. Okay? So we're going to describe matching, we're going to describe pricing of the platform. So matching is very important because matching decides the waiting time for the passenger and waiting time for the drivers. So essentially, matching decides the market friction and this economic term. Okay? So market friction arises in two stages: online matching and physical meeting. Essentially, the meeting time for you to meet a person in cyberspace and the meeting time for you to meet a person in physical space. Okay? So essentially, from the customer perspective, when you send a request to the platform, you wait some time for your match to be matched with the driver, and then you wait for additional time for the driver to show up, right? So customer experience matching time and pickup time. And then by symmetry, the driver is going to experience the same amount of matching time, pickup time. Sometimes we call it deadheading time. So they're on the pickup journey, we call them a deadheading to pick up passengers. So they're going to experience this pickup time, and driver also experience the matching time. Okay? So by describing the matching technology, we're going to estimate those matching time and pickup time. Okay? So because I'm building a macroscopic model, so how do I describe the matching technology? I'm going to use a production functions. So we're going to use the aggregate matching function to describe how efficient this matching process is. Okay, this is essentially a production function for the matching technology. The input to the production will be number of the waiting customers and number of the waiting drivers. The output is the matching rate, okay? How many people you match in the unit of time. So if the matching is very efficient, with the same input, the output can be higher, okay? And then if you look at, from the passenger side, essentially, this is number of people in waiting for to be matched. And you have a newly generated demand, and entering the systems, you have the matching rate leaving the systems. So if you think about from the queuing perspective, this is arrival rate, this is going to be the departure rate. This is the number of people in the systems. So then if you're assuming steady state, and so arrival rate equal to departure rate, and then you can apply Little's law to estimate the number of waiting time, or number of matching time, the amount of matching time. So the number of waiting customers will be equal to the matching time times demand. Okay, so that's the Little's law. So this is for driver side. The same thing can be done for this is for the passenger side, and the same thing can be done for the driver side. Okay, so then with steady state and by applying Little's law, you have those three equations. You just substitute them plug them into the matching function. So then essentially, you will get a relationship between customer's matching time, driver's matching time, and demand. Okay? So for example, we use DD data in Chengdu. We calibrated this matching function. So this is customer matching time, this is demand of the systems, and this is the driver's matching time. Okay? They follow such a relationship. That's how we actually get the matching time, through a matching function. And then for pickup time, so theoretically, you can make assumption that when passenger send the request and driver are spatially distributed following certain distribution, you can calibrate, you can estimate the average matching time or pickup time. So the average pickup time essentially inversely proportional to the number of the idle driver in the space. Okay, so Carl D'Angelo actually studied this problem. And by assuming uniform distribution alpha equal to 0.5, so here we just generalize equal to minus alpha, and we use, once again, Chengdu's data, we calibrate, and this is essentially the pickup time functions for Chengdu. Okay? So now, in summary, that's how I actually model the waiting time. Customer's waiting time equal to the online matching time plus the pickup time, and driver's waiting time equal to driver's matching time plus pickup time. And then the driver's matching time and the customer's matching time and driver's matching time follow a certain relationship. And then the pickup time is inversely proportional to the number of idle drivers, which equal to the driver's idle time or matching time times the n, right? So they have a system that describes the market friction, describe the waiting time. So to facilitate my presentation, in the following, I'm going to use this simple equation to represent these systems. The equation essentially relates customers' waiting time, drivers' waiting time with demand. Okay, we're going to use this one equation to represent the systems. Okay, so once I have that, the basic modeling system I work with is very simple. Okay, so I have, this is from matching. Okay, this is from matching, and demand, we assume that demand for the ride source and service follow a demand function. It's a function of the fare, customer's waiting time, and in-vehicle time. So the in-vehicle time is going to be assumed to be constant. And then for the drivers, given the number of the driver either will be occupied and unoccupied. So, or unoccupied. The number of occupied drivers is going to be equal to the demand times how long each passenger is going to occupy the drivers. So that's another application of Little's law. So this will give you the number of the occupied drivers. And then the number of unoccupied drivers will be equal to the demand times the number of waiting time. And you can further decompose this into the number of the idle drivers and the number of the drivers who are engaged with a customer and on the pickup journey. Okay? So that's essentially you can decompose it. But anyway, so I have a basic modeling systems with 3 equations. Okay? 3 equations. But I have 5 unknowns: customer's waiting time, demand, fare, and driver's waiting time, and also the driver's number. Okay, the number of drivers. So if the number of drivers is given, and if the fare is given, I will be able to solve these basic systems to estimate the realized demand, customer's waiting time, and driver's waiting time. Okay, so that's essentially the basic systems. And then if I treat the fare and fleet size as decision variables, and this system essentially define a 3 inclusive function. The 3 inclusive function will be the demand and waiting time and customer's waiting time, driver's waiting time, the function of fare and fleet size. So with these 3 inclusive functions, I will be able to model the market situations. Okay? The market situation, for example, I can look at monopoly. The monopoly situation, that's essentially DiDi's position in China, is monopoly. So then for monopolists is going to determine the fare and commission to maximize their profit. And then this constraint determine how the number of driver is given. Okay? Because you assume competitive labor supply market, and driver are going to keep signing up until their profit equals 0. So this equation essentially assume a competitive labor supply market, and then with that, you can determine the number of the fleet size. Okay? So you solve this problem, and you can derive the optimum price for the monopoly. Okay? And then you can also compare this monopoly situation with a second best situation where you can determine the fare, commission, fleet size to maximize social welfare while ensuring certain profit margin for the platform and for the drivers. The reason why we look at second best instead of first best, because if you maximize social welfare, and so because the matching technology is increasing return to scale, so therefore if you do first best, and so the producer profit will be negative, which is now sustainable. So that's the reason why we want to ensure certain profit margin for the platform and for the driver. You want to maximize social welfare. Okay? So then with this, you can actually also solve this problem to derive the optimum pricing. And also you can compute all the performance measures, the consumer surplus and social surplus. And then you can compare monopoly with second best. Okay? So now, how do you determine, when you determine a regulation policy and you ask yourself a question, so what type of policy I can design such that the regulated monopoly achieves second best? Okay, so that's how you derive regulation policy. Okay, once again, you impose that regulation policy such that the regulated monopoly equal second best. Okay, so that's the exercise you do. So we've done that exercise in this paper, and we show that. So in terms of socio-economic impact, although the ride sourcing platform does not own any vehicle, they behave exactly the same like a traditional cab company who decide the price and the fleet size to maximize their profit. Okay, the socio-economic impact is the same. So if you want to regulate traditional taxi company, you may want to regulate price sourcing platform if they have so much market power. How are you going to do that? In traditional taxi company, we regulate market entry, we regulate price. We have to regulate N and F. So here, we don't have to. We just need to regulate the commissions. You can achieve second best. Okay? So that's how we derive that insight. So we just suggest that, okay, regulating commission alone, how do you do that? You second the commission at the second best level, you will be able to achieve the second best. The regulated monopoly will be second best. Okay? So in this paper, we also show that the competition between platforms, if you think about duopoly situation, that was a lot of city in the US, Uber is competing with Lyft. So in duopoly situation, we show that competition does not necessarily reduce price or improve social welfare. The major reason for that is the matching technology is increasing return to scale. So if you add more people, more driver and more passenger to the platform, that's going to reduce the waiting time, going to improve the social welfare. You want to encourage Uber and Lyft to merge such that they can actually, the total social welfare will increase. Okay, but that never happened, and then you can also regulate commission to improve social welfare. Okay, so that's essentially how we derive that insight through a very simple aggregate modeling. So in that aggregate model, there's no spatial, no time dimensions. Okay, so we have to verify the effectiveness of this regulation using more complicated model. So which means that we need to extend the model along the time and space dimensions. Okay, so the first extension, spatial dimension. So essentially now, previously we assumed the spatially homogeneous. Now we have to consider the spatially, the city is now homogeneous. Okay, they're inhomogeneous. So then how do you do? And you divide the whole city into different zones. For each zone, you're still assuming homogeneous. Okay, essentially Didi and Uber, they cover different city using hexagon. Okay, for each hexagon, you assume it is homogeneous. And then you have a demand function for each hexagon. Okay, and then in the spatial extension, we are concerned about, given the total number of supply, how this total supply, labor supply, will be distributed spatially, okay, across different zones. So that's the purpose of spatial extension. So for that, we're going to make some assumption, okay? We assume that driver has the perfect information. Because Didi does provide this type of heat map to drivers. So driver knows where the passengers are. So we assume that driver will always go to the zone where they perceive to be the most profitable to compete. So therefore, assuming drivers are perfectly rational at a steady state, we assume that each zone will be equally profitable. Okay, so that's a steady state condition about spatial distribution of the labor supply. So mathematically, the numerator is about how much the driver get by finishing one transaction. So this is how much the fare, and eta is the percentage charged by the platform, like 20%, so they get 80%. So 80% of the fare, the denominator is how long it takes the driver to finish the transactions. So how long the driver has to wait for the transaction, and how long it takes the driver to deliver the passenger to his or her final destination. So the ratio will determine an hourly income. That hourly income has to be the same across different zones. Okay, so that's the condition specified the spatial distribution of the labor supply. And with this simple extension, you will be able to get, for example, spatial pricing for monopoly. Okay, so once again, they're trying to determine the fare and fleet size to maximize their revenue. This is about matching, the matching relationship I mentioned before for each zones. And this is about demand. This is about the vehicle status conservation constraint I talked about. This is code for each zones. And then this is how the total labor supply will be distributed spatially, and this is how the total labor supply will be determined. Essentially, the hourly income equal to the operation cost. Okay, so this is essentially a competitive labor supply market. You have this. So solving this problem, you can also derive this optimum pricing formula, and then you can also compare the monopoly with the second best, and then you think about how can I make sure that regulated monopoly becomes second best. Okay, you go through that exercise to derive insight for regulation costs. So this is about spatial extension. Okay, so spatial extension is concerned about how labor supply will be distributed spatially. So for temporal extension, I will be concerned about how the labor supply will be distributed temporally and along the time dimensions. So for that, it's about temporal extension. So for that, we need to consider drivers' work scheduling behaviors, because essentially the labor supply distribution along the time depends on how people make their work scheduling decisions. Okay? So we ask ourselves the question, does people really adjust their work schedule based on their market conditions? And so to see that, we use some empirical data to answer that question. So for example, we only look at working hours, okay? Number of working hours. So you can do a simple regression analysis to regress the number of working hours with respect to income, hourly income, plus other socioeconomic attributes of the drivers and also the market conditions. And then you look at beta 1. Beta 1 is essentially the elasticity. If beta 1 is positive, which means that if hourly income is higher, driver work longer. Negative beta, meaning that if drivers, if hourly income is higher and driver work less. So sometimes this happens, we call income targeting hypothesis. So drivers start a day with the income target in mind. So if the hourly income is higher, it takes less amount of time for them to reach that target. After that, they just quit. Okay? So we use the data, this data in Beijing, and then we calibrate. It turned out to be 5% of drivers actually are income targeting, and 57% of the drivers are neoclassical. So the key point I'm trying to make here is more than 60% driver adjust the work schedule based on market conditions. So that's the reason why if you do temporal extension, you have to consider drivers' work scheduling behaviors. Okay? So how are we going to do that? We build a time-expanded network. We divide the whole day into, for example, 24 intervals. And this is the start of the hour, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then the solid line represents working links. And the dashed line represents taking rest, take a break. And then the dot line represents the connectors. And this is the origin and this destination. Origin is essentially the start of the shift. And destination is ending the shift. Okay, it's not physical origin destination. Essentially, it represents starting the shift and ending the shift. So you have n people traveling from this origin destination. Essentially, in this time-expanded network, each pass represents a work schedule. Okay, and the pass flow is how many people choose this work schedule. So then, for this particular work schedule, so people start working at 1 o'clock for 1 hour and take a break for 2 hours, then go back to work for 20 hours, then go home. Okay? Not realistic, but feasible. So you have a lot of feasible work schedules, then they determine pass flow. Pass flow is essentially being that how many people choose this work schedule. So then once you have the pass flow, and so for the working link, the link flow gonna be the summation of the pass flow that uses this link. And the link flow essentially is how many people provide hourly, how many people provide labor in this hour. So essentially hourly labor supply. So once you know the hourly labor supply, and you can call our previous spatial model to determine the hourly income. So essentially the spatial model we proposed before essentially define a link revenue function. The input, so given the link flow, and so this system gives you the hourly income for the working link. So therefore, if you follow a work schedule, summing over the hourly income along the working hours will give you the total income for the work schedule. You can also estimate the cost, operation cost along the working hours, and also this utility associated with working with early hour or late night. So you can calibrate this coefficient for this utility, and you will be able to specify utility function for the neoclassical driver and for income calculating drivers. Yes?
How do you define the work status? Is that they turn on and off the app, or is it responding to the work assignment, or what?
Is they available to be matched?
So
Meaning that if you turn on,
the
app and they're ready to join the workforce, right? So they're on the platform. So this become an idle drivers, which will be matched with the potential customers. Okay. So anyway, so you can specify the utility function for each path, and then you assume driver actually choosing the path by maximizing their utility. They always choose the path with maximum utility, and now you know that I actually convert the market equilibrium into a narrow equilibrium problem. So then it's easy for you to formulate a variational inequality to describe that narrow equilibrium, and essentially you can compute the market equilibrium, okay? And then with that, you can also formulate the platform's dynamic and spatial pricing strategy as a mathematical program with equilibrium constraints and terms. So it's very familiar with. So the narrow equilibrium become a constraint, and then you want to maximum describe the platform behavior, revenue maximizing behaviors. Okay. So with this spatial and temporal models, we can then investigate the regulation policy in a time-varying, spatially anisotropic market. Okay, so spatially inhomogeneous and time-dependent market. So we actually did this in these two papers. We actually verified that the key message is capping commissions remain effective in achieving second best. Okay, so instead of elaborating.
Is capping based on like the percentage of failure or just constant?
That's good. It really depends on, I will discuss. The cap has different resolutions. Depends on your pricing strategy. I will do that differently. But now we actually look at, for this study, we look at capping per unit time. Okay? So previously in the aggregate model, there's no time dimension. The capping per trip is not a percentage, okay, amount.
Per trip.
Right. So we did this study. We deal with these two extensions, these two papers. Okay. So instead of elaborating these two extensions, I would rather present you a empirical analysis. Okay. We done an empirical analysis using DD data in Hangzhou, and in this empirical analysis, we only did a spatial pricing for the peak hour. Okay. We only solved the spatial model. Other than that, spatial temporal model. Okay, so DD divide Hangzhou into 65 zones, and then they provide a bunch of data, which include the 8 million request order from the first 3 weeks of 2016, and so which involve more than 30,000 drivers whose average working time is 2.7. Okay, so using information, we calibrate the demand function for each 65 zones, and we calibrate log linear demand functions. And then DD for Hangzhou, they actually implement the pricing strategy. So they have a base price, which depends on time. So time-based price. So omega Li is in-vehicle time. This is the unit price. This is given. So DD did a search pricing. Essentially, in this situation, is a spatially differentiated pricing, which means that for each zones, they're going to determine this search multiplier, the gamma I. So gamma I is a search multiplier, which will be applied to this phase structure, and gamma I will be different from zone to zone. Okay. So we just solved the spatial model, and so we actually estimate the pricing for each of the zones. Okay. So the key message I want to say that is we can decompose the price that DD charged to each zone into 3 components. The first component is about how you cover the operation cost. The second component is monopoly markup. The third component, which is negative, which is we call matching tonality. The matching tonality is if you add one more passenger to the platform, how much the waiting time will be decreased. So negative meaning that adding one more customer to the platform will reduce customers' waiting time. Okay, which is negative. So this is due to the nature of the two-sided market. If you add one more passenger to the platform, that will attract more driver to the platform, reducing passengers' waiting time. So this is cross-narrow elasticity of externality, which is actually positive. Okay, adding one more passenger to the platform actually reduces the passengers' waiting time. Okay, so due to the nature of the two-sided market. But anyway, the key point I'm trying to convey, because in the study, we also compute the impact of social welfare and consumer surplus, etc. So you can compute everything, this economic, do all the evaluation of the economic impact. So the key message I want to convey is the markup is huge. It's more than 50% of the fare. This can justify regulation. Okay? So I said I'm not advocating regulating or imposing economic regulation for the pricing, sourcing platforms. It's only if the platform has huge market power, then that's going to compromise public interest. Then you want to regulate. So that's case by case. So in this particular case, the market power is huge, then that could justify regulation. So how are you going to regulate that? And so you can do, once again, imposing, capping the commission for unit time. Because the pricing strategy is capping, is time dependent. So we're going to capping the commission by unit time. It turned out to be, if you do that, you can increase the social welfare by 20%. But certainly if you cap the commissions, they're going to reduce the platform's margin, so profit margin. So therefore, which one you're going to implement? A proper choice of commission cap will seek a balance between the market efficiency and also the platform's profit margin. Okay? So intuitively, why this regulation work? Because if you cap the commissions, so pretty much for each transaction and the income, the revenue for the platform is fixed. Okay? Because I cap the commissions. So if I cap the commission, then it's in the best interest of the platform to maximize the number of transactions, which essentially increase consumer surplus, which will increase social welfare. That's the intuition why capping commission is sufficient. Okay? So I think I will have another topic. So my major takeaway for the first topic will be we have a macroscopic modeling framework to model the whole market. You could use that framework for other purposes, but here we actually try to derive the policy insight for regulations. Okay? So we show that capping commission has potential to enhance market efficiency, and the policy can have different solutions. And so you can impose the cap per trip. Okay? The maximum commission you can get per trip is how much? Or you can cap the commission for a unit distance, for unit time. And the cap can be different with respect to location and time of day. Okay? So you have a different type of resolution for imposing a cap, and higher resolution leads to more difficulty in terms of implementation. So therefore, really, the choice will depend on your trade-off between implementation complexity and effectiveness. Lastly, I have to emphasize, once again, I'm not advocating regulating right sourcing company. Okay? So because there are so many reasons, good reasons not to regulate right sourcing market. So you want to encourage innovation, and also we know that once a regulatory agency wants to regulate industry, and the agency tend to be captured by the industry they are regulating. Okay? So if you look at the literature, so economists been arguing that we shouldn't regulate traditional taxi market. They should be deregulated. A lot of arguments actually are applicable to right sourcing market. Okay? So my point here, my message here is, you have to judge the necessity of the regulation case by case. If the right sourcing platform has huge market power, then that could justify the regulation. Otherwise, you leave them alone. So in this situation, I tend to believe that in the current situation, we shouldn't regulate Uber or Lyft. But one thing we should do is, no matter what we do, we should allow the traditional taxi company to compete with Uber and Lyft on equal footing. Okay? So maybe we need to deregulate the traditional taxi company, or form another systematic policy for both right sourcing company and traditional taxi company, and level the playing field to allow them to compete. Okay, so that's the. I know we could spend time and a lot of time discussing this issue, but I want to close this topic because I'm going to use 10 minutes to talk about something I feel is pretty interesting. Okay, so we sort of switch the gear. So I'm going to talk about the macroscopic fundamental diagram of right sourcing system, because I think you guys are familiar with macroscopic fundamental diagram of traffic network, or even the fundamental diagram for freeways, highway, basic freeway segment, right? So, we think about, okay, what is the fundamental diagram for right sourcing systems? So to look at problem, you have to view the right sourcing system as an input-output system. So input-output system will be the rider is going to flow into the system, spend some time in it, and then flow out. So when the passenger send a request to the platform, they officially enter the system. They spend some time. When they get delivered to the final destination, they leave the systems. Okay, you think about input-output system. So then the throughput of the system is the number of the rider who arrived at the destination at unit time. That's the throughput of the systems. Accumulation is number of rider in the systems, right? So we're going to show that the throughput of the right sourcing system can decline with accumulation, similar to traffic network. And we're going to discuss why that happened, how we're going to prevent that from happening. Okay? So not every system like that. For typical, I call them type 1 system. For type 1 system, if you plot accumulation versus throughput, initially as accumulation increases, throughput increases, and reaching the capacity, right? So after that, it doesn't matter how much you increase the accumulation, the system's throughput stay at the capacity. So we call this type 1 system. But there's a type 2 systems that there exists a critical accumulation. Initially, the throughput increase with accumulation, and beyond that critical accumulation, you have throughput drop, right? And then the maximum throughput defines the capacity, and so beyond this region, the efficient region, this region, and the inefficient region. So you are familiar with this concept because a good example of type 2 system is the condition network. The macroscopic fundamental diagram will tell you what's the critical accumulation, and then you define the capacity, right? So we ask ourselves a question: is right sourcing system type 1 system or not? Is the right sourcing system type 1 or type 2? Because we have data from DD, so therefore we will be able to plot the accumulation and throughput. We're going to observe whether the right sourcing system is type 1 or type 2. But it turned out to be it's easier for us to plot another curve instead of this macroscopic fundamental diagram, which is the supply curve. The supply curve is travel time with respect to flow. But remember, when you have an MFD, you can determine speed. Once you have speed, if you know the length of your network, you can compute the average travel time, average time spent in the systems, right? Then you can plot the throughput versus time. Then you have a backward bending supply curve. This is a economists call them supply curve, right? So once again, you have a backward bending supply curve, and then you have this, the lower portion going to be efficient regions, and then the backward bending portion going to be inefficient regions. Okay? So now, we're ready to use the data to plot how the supply curve of the right sourcing system looks like. And the left panel is the Uber system in New York, plotted by previous researchers. And then right panel is the supply curve for DD system in Chengdu. Okay, so we have multiple curves. That one curve is corresponding to one level of labor supply, because not every registered driver is working all the time. So early morning, only 20% driver are working, for example. And in the rush hour, most of the drivers will be working, right? So this is, by analogy, you can think of as the supply curve for 1-lane freeway, 2-lane freeway, 3-lane freeway. So the supply is different. So you can see that you definitely see a backward bending supply curve, indicating that the right sourcing system is a type 2 system. And also, the system operation sometimes, system operate in efficient region sometimes, okay, in rush hour. So you have a backward bending curve. So this defines the throughput of the systems. So then we have to explain why this happened, how this happened, and how we're going to prevent it from happening. So it turned out to be, you can identify two causes for inefficiency. The first cause is white goose chase. The second cause will be countryside delivery. So white goose chase is a term proposed by those researchers. Okay? The reason why white goose chase happen is, so whenever a passenger will send a request to the platform, the platform tries to give the match as soon as possible. They try to make a quick match. So then when the system is experiencing supply shortage, they could match, so when the passenger sends a request, the platform gonna potentially match a passenger with a driver far away. The driver gonna spend a lot of time on that heading trip. So they call this a white goose chase. And remember, this is a huge waste of resource because the system is experiencing supply shortage at the one hand. On the other hand, you allow the driver to spend a lot of time on that heading journey. So that's the reason why the system is backward bending. And how are we going to prevent that? The intuition is, there is a reason why the driver spend a lot of time on that heading trip because your matching radius is huge, like 10 miles. If you reduce the matching radius, you should sort of mitigate the inefficiency. So that's our intuitions, which need to be verified by modeling. So the second reason for inefficiency, I think it's easy for you to understand, which is indiscriminate matching. So you treat passenger equally, which is right to do, right? You do not discriminate any passenger, but passenger could go to a hotspot, could go to CBD, or could go to countryside. So if you match a passenger with the driver delivers the passenger to the countryside, and then the driver going to experience a lot of cruising time or idle time in order for that driver to get a match. This, and once again, is a waste of resource because the system is experiencing supply shortage. So, how are we going to do that? How are we going to resolve the issue? And because this is caused by indiscriminate matching, then the solution is going to be you have to treat them differently. So essentially, you do a demand rationing. So if the passenger are going to a cold spot, the system is going to hold the passenger longer, and given matching priority to the passenger who are going to popular spot. The demand rationing will mitigate the issues, but certainly it's going to create inequality, and you cherry pick which passenger you want to serve, right? Which passenger you give priority. So it sort of creates certain inequity, the inequality among the passengers. But anyway, so that's the intuition. So we have to use macroscopic modeling to verify our intuitions. Okay, I'm going to go over this very quickly. So in constructing the model, we first look at a spatially homogeneous market, similar to the first model I presented. And we're going to view the whole system as a two double-ended queue. Okay, as one double-ended queue, because you have a queue on the passenger side and a queue on the driver side, and both are double-ended because when the travel plan is longer, somebody could abandon the queuing. So it's essentially a double-ended queue. When they meet, they disappear. So once you view this, and we can actually define the steady-state probability, you can calculate all the performance measures, such as the waiting time, pickup time, you can calculate the mean and variance, etc. And then we look at how, if you change the matching radius, and how all the performance measure will change. And then we're going to derive the performance function or the supply function. So, in this study, we show that a finite matching radius, okay, with a finite matching radius, doesn't matter how small it is, the supply curve is always backward bending. Okay, you have a very small matching radius, and the supply curve is always backward bending. But a smaller matching radius does lead to a weaker bend. Okay, so if you reduce the matching radius, and your supply curve can shift this way. if you really want to get rid of the band, you have to adaptively adjust the matching radius in a certain way. How? We don't know yet. We just proved it can be done, but we didn't propose a particular method to do that. Okay. So if you want to show the inefficiency of the indiscrete matching, and you have to consider spatial and anisotropy, which means that spatially they're not homogeneous. Once again, you cut the whole region into different homogeneous zone sub-area, and for each sub-area, you're going to model this as a double-ended cube. They have many double-ended cubes, and those cubes are not independent because they're connected by driver's trip. When driver delivers a passenger from here to here, you have a departure from here, you have an arrival here, of idle driver here. So the driver trips will connect all the double-ended cube. Then you can assume that you have new drivers entering the market, old driver leaving the market, and you have an open queue network. You may have a closed queue network. Okay? So essentially we get a queue network. So once you have a queue network, and then you can actually divide all the traffic equations, and you can compute the steady state distribution of the network. And then with the model, you'll be able to determine the optimum demand rationing. So which one to serve first, and then you can verify that with rationing, the supply curve can only come down. With severe rationing, you'll be able to get rid of that. Okay? So I go this very quickly. So major takeaway for my second part will be right sourcing system is the type 2 system. The throughput can decline with accumulation. It's very similar to the traffic network. The inefficiency is caused by two reasons. One is because you want to make a quick commitment of a match. The second one, you treat the passenger equally. So the consequence is called as Y equals chase or countryside delivery. So if you want to address Y equals chase, you can reduce matching radius, but you cannot completely get rid of it. In order to get rid of the band, you have to adjust that matching radius adaptively. And then for the countryside delivery, and you can do demand rationing, you can do differentiated matching, but that's going to create inequality among riders, and then you have to make a trade-off. Okay, how much throughput you want to increase, and how much inequality you want to create. But if you create a lot of inequality, that's going to be a new issue for the regulation policy. So how do you regulate the level of the discrimination? Okay, so with this, I finish what I plan to have to cover. I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any.
For the second topic, it's very interesting, and then I'm less familiar with those topics.
Mm-hmm.
But those system inefficiency, is there any chance the system inefficiency coming from the congestion in rush hour time itself?
You mean the traffic?
Yes. So like a longer time to travel, you know?
Right, okay. Good, very good question. So when we draw this curve, you have to be careful because this is the travel time, right? So then in rush hour, the travel is going to be longer. So therefore, it's similar to inflation adjustment. We do congestion adjustment. Okay, essentially you plot the time, the distance,
right,
versus right.
Mm-hmm.
So that will sort of normalize that congestion and normalize it away. So but if you really want to consider congestion, my intuition is this even worse. I think, yeah. The congestion is going to make the situation even worse. Because in rush hour, and take a longer time to travel the passenger from, so if you think about without congestion and with congestion, so then with congestion, the number of occupied drivers can be more, right? So that actually reduces throughput. So the percent of, so the throughput is inversely proportional to, the throughput is proportional to the percent hour to be Okay, let's put it this way. So if you spend a lot of time on delivering, it takes more time for you to finish one transaction. Right? You want to finish transaction as soon as possible, and then you can increase its turnover. Right? That will be the turnover essentially decide the throughput of the system. Right.
I think you got my first question. That's great. So Yafeng, excellent presentation. Learned a lot from your presentation. So I want to know more about, because all the customer and driver are not all equally, and the same for drivers. Because certain drivers, they maybe only want to go some place.
Yeah.
A certain place they don't want to go.
Right.
And of course, each city may be different. And
Right.
some drivers try to avoid certain location
Right.
to pick up the customer.
Yes.
So how do you consider that in your modeling?
We actually treat them equally. So we just follow what the platform practice, right? So platform treat all the driver equally. You don't really have a choice. So if the match is made, you have to follow the match. So there's a percent time you can actually, there's some possibility for you to cancel or reject the match, but you can only do that a few times. So if you do that a lot, and your rating can be smaller and less likely for you to get a match. So when the platform does this type of thing, okay, I take it back. They're not treating all the drivers equally, so the matching will depend on your service quality, your ranking, but with the same class of drivers, they treat them equally. Okay, the matching. So I have a bunch of drivers, and then if the driver offers the same service quality, the rating the same, and then I will match them spatially. So that's some of the practice. But now they actually do much more sophisticated thing than that. So they talk about look at the driver's history, and then they'll sort of do the so-called MDP matching, market decision process matching. So really, when they do the systematic matching, they actually compute, okay? So if I match this passenger to this driver, what is the immediate return? Essentially, so the driver will get the, how much value this match will bring to the platform. It's easy to get the immediate return. And then they're gonna look at the future. Because if I match this passenger, depending on where the passenger is going, if I match this passenger to the driver, and then they're gonna estimate how likely for this driver to get a future order. So they look at essentially a market decision process, and they actually approximate that value function in the matching strategy.
And yeah, very good. And another one is, so for driver, when they try to decide to pick up people,
Right.
they're also thinking about not just try to pick up this particular, they will think about where I'm going, and what's the return, and do I got customer? If I go too far, try to pick up this customer, maybe I don't want to pick up this customer, maybe I want to go this, maybe I can pick up more customers.
Okay, I have to tell you how drivers have a flexibility in deciding, when they become idle, they have a flexibility in deciding where to go. Okay? So you become idle, and it's up to you to decide where you want to go to search for new customers. But you're not searching, you're just waiting to be matched, right? If you go to hotspot, you'll be higher probability to be matched, right? So the platform does not control the idle driver's behaviors. But if I match you, then you're gonna follow my order to pick up the passenger. You have to follow the match, okay? So which passenger you take does not depend on you, depends on the platform, right?
So one point, one particular point, what that you mentioned is saying that basically it doesn't make things better if we have competitors.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Now my question is, if for like Uber, I'm not sure if they are doing that or not. If the drivers could serve the both companies.
Yes.
And also if the passengers download both the app
Right.
and check the prices
Right.
while they request the service.
Right.
Which means everybody has complete information.
Yes.
Will that change anything? or
Yes,
not?
that's correct. That's a very good point. So if you consider multi-homing, and then essentially you can view these two systems essentially operate at a single platform, which is reciprocal platform, right? If passenger do their due diligence, in deciding which one to pick, right? Whoever offer me the smaller waiting time or more cost-effective way, I take that platform. If you talk about passenger side multi-homing, passenger side. For the driver side, you also think about multi-homing, which means that the driver work for both platforms simultaneously. Then this usually is one platform. However, personally, I don't do multi-homing. I always go with Uber. I never check Lyft. I don't even download the Lyft app in my right?
Cheaper.
Right. Right. Yeah, opposite. So there's a homogeneity among the passenger, right? So many passengers are not doing multi-homing, and some of the passengers are doing, right? And then even for the driver side, I oftentimes talk to them. They actually, most of the I think the platform is the platform policy not to allow you to work for multiple companies, but some drivers do that. But you cannot.
Most of them actually do that.
But you cannot really. It's very difficult for you to open two apps and do that simultaneously.
So they have two phones.
Yeah. But the problem is, remember,
You cannot reject it too much.
you cannot reject too much. If you get matched simultaneously, you have to decide which one to pick. And then that damage your rating for the platform. Right.
So I noticed recently, I don't know if anybody experienced it, when there was a hot time to use Uber, they would accept the ride before they were finished with their previous ride.
Yes.
And that increases the customer waiting time. Do you believe
Decrease or increase?
the
Increase.
customer's waiting time
Yeah.
is increased? Because you have to wait for the driver to finish their trip.
Right. Okay.
Right, you're looking that they're going different
Okay.
direction.
Gotcha.
But that decreases the problem of the radius because they're probably matching you
Yeah.
with the close by driver.
Yeah.
How do you think that's a good strategy, or it has its shortcomings?
Right. So that's the problem of. So that even. So my intuition is. They're doing more to try to lock the passengers, right? You want to make a quick commitment firstly, and so if you look at Uber strategy, and when you send a request, so the response is very quick. The reason why they do that because they want to compete with Lyft. So the customer's matching time very small, but your pickup time is very low. That increased the backlog damage.
But that's not necessary. I mean, if they know where the destination of the previous trip is,
Right.
and they probably just pick whatever close to the.
So they do that.
Then the waiting time may not be increased.
Right, it really depends, right. So when Uber tried to match, okay, which one is available, and they look at the vehicle that about to finish their journey, that considered as the idle drivers. Then within the matching radius, they essentially just do this type of thing. So that essentially is a reinforced version of quick commitment. Okay, you reduce the passenger's waiting time, okay, or the matching time. Okay, reduce the passenger time.
I have two questions. First is about the macroscopic fundamental diagram.
Right.
So currently, the matching is following certain policies, not like the result of optimization.
Right.
I guess it's but if we, I recall there was some thought analysis to look at the minimum matching time. So for using continuum approximation, but you can also look into more microscopic optimization. But I'm thinking you may be able to construct an upper bound for that curve, which is going to be always increasing, because if you're using optimal matching, of course, more customers, meaning probably a higher output rate. The white goose effect, the countryside effect will become. But I think you may be able to come up
Okay,
with
that's a good point. So first of all, if you think about Uber strategy, because they're trying to compete with Lyft, right? So essentially, you can view them as doing a continuous matching. Okay, continuous matching. So whenever you have a passenger request, I will match with the driver quickly. So because I have so very high matching radius, and I can always find a idle driver to match, but the idle driver will be far, far away. So that's the reason why the strategy they're taking, so they know the consequence. It's just because the competition, they choose this thing to do. But if you think about what Didi does, Didi in monopoly situation, they don't do that. So what Didi does was, okay, when I have I will sort of use a discrete time matching, meaning that I'm not doing the matching continuously. So I wait, for example, 5 seconds. So I'm going to treat within the multiple requests coming in 5 seconds, and then I'm going to do a bipartite matching. Okay, so to match with my drivers and customer, to solve a bipartite matching problem, I get the match, optimal match. So the decision will be how long I do the matching interval. But the trade-off going to be, if your matching interval is long, the passengers matching time going to be longer, the pickup time can be shorter. Okay, pickup time is shorter. So there's a sweet spot which minimize the total waiting time for the passengers. But that is when the system is not congested, when you have sufficient supply. But when the system is congested, and when you have a supply shortage, you cannot do this anymore because there's always a waiting. The passenger always in a queue. Okay? So in that situation, it's really up to if you do.
You can do cherry pick.
That's essentially what we talk about. So there's always a queue. So essentially in Didi, if you look at Didi platform, and when there is a peak hour, they organize the customer in a virtual queue, and they serve the virtual queue first come first serve manner, because they treat them equal. So if I can cherry pick them, I can get rid of them, as we suggested, right? So essentially you sort of create inequality among the passengers. So this really depends on this is a trade-off we have to make.
Yeah, and also for your spatial analysis, that's for stationary.
Yeah, we always
But
first.
in your the job assignment, that's sort of dynamic over the day. So you use a stationary to approximate the dynamic.
Yes, you can view all the model. The first 3 models I presented for the first part are all stationary.
Yeah.
All stationary. So I didn't really talk about dynamic. So it's really time dependent, right? Because for each hourly labor supply, and then I still use stationary spatial model to get that. So this is the equilibrium steady state on the dynamic on the network. So it's all steady state. You can see this is actually approximation to the truly dynamic model, which
So
we
did you do sensitivity analysis on that?
no, we haven't done that because and remember the purpose of this steady state analysis is to derive the policy insight, right? It's not to support the operations. So I don't really care about the transient state. I only care about steady state, and then I can derive the policy insight. So that's the purpose why we go with that steady state approximation. Yeah.
I think we have run out of time. Okay, let's get to the question and answer after the session. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much.